extremely excited to bring Paul back onto Portal to Ascension. And a little bit about Paul. Let me pull up his bio here. You've probably seen Paul a few times on Portal Ascension the last few years. We've been doing a good amount of things together, and just an amazing individual with so much insight. Our conversations are always so profound, and we just go deep with really not just, he shares so much. His own YouTube channel, Paul Anthony Wallis, and then also on The Fifth Kind, he's going over many different topics there. But his own research in regards to biblical truth has been something close to my heart, something that I've really, have looked into myself. And so when I found Paul, and I was introduced to Paul by Omar, and started going to his information, I was just eating it up, just really going deep into all this awareness. And you can check out a few of our interviews we've had on our YouTube channel, Portal to Ascension, YouTube/Portal to Ascension, and you can see how much fun we're having these conversations. So everybody, let's go ahead and introduce Paul Anthony Wallis. He is an international best-selling author whose books probe world mythologies and ancestral narratives for the insights into human origins, human potential, and our place in the cosmos. A popular speaker and researcher, his documentaries and collaborations are watched by millions. As a senior churchman, Paul served as a church doctor, a theological educator, and an archdeacon at the Anglican Church in Australia, with numerous titles published on Christian mysticism and spirituality. His 2020 book, Escape from Eden, was hailed by George Noory as this generation's Chariots of the Gods, propelling Paul onto the international stage as the go-to guy of paleo-contact. And his book after that, The Scars of Eden, is endorsed by Erich Von Daniken. And then he's also got a third book in the series as well. So let's go ahead and bring Paul on here. There we go. Hey, Paul, how you doing, brother? What's that?
Hey, Neil, it's great to be with you. Thanks for having me today.
Yeah, it's good to see you too, man. How you been?
It's been full on. It really has.
But I bet, so hopefully you can kind of share if there's anything new, because we haven't really connected in a while too, so.
Well, you mentioned the third book. So Echoes of Eden is the new book this year in 2022. So that we're still in the launch phase of that, really. It came out in May, and I've just recorded the Audible version of Escaping from Eden. So that'll be available on Audible, Amazon, iTunes, other platforms very soon. And heaps of other things going on as well. So it's been a full 2022 already.
Beautiful, brother. All right, so what are you sharing with us today? Are you doing a PowerPoint, or are you talking directly? What's the setup?
I'm low tech as always. I'm just going to share some thoughts without any slides or any technology. And what I'm going to talk about is why I think Greek mythology is important. And I wanted to start off by saying I really feel that I'm here not as an expert in Greek mythology by any stretch of imagination at all. I'm absolutely here today as a student, and I really sit at the feet of you, Neil, and Ed and Marguerite, and all the information that you shared. I hope I'm not going to dumb things down too much after the amazing information that would be given. But essentially, I'm here as a PS to say, this is why I think it's important. This is why it's important to me. So that's sort of the angle I'm taking.
Okay, beautiful. Well, you can take it away, and I'm here. So if you want me to engage, get some questions, I'll be in the background.
All right, thanks, Neil. Well, my introduction to Greek myth was at school, and I was introduced to this amazing canon of literature as if I was being introduced to a canon of stories of a single layer. So essentially the layer was this: moral tale, adventure, tragedy. These were the genres we expected to find in Greek mythology: a sequence of moral tales, adventures, tragedies. These were the classics. And obviously I now understand it refers to the classical period, but I think in our minds, these were the classic stories alongside the classic movies and the classic novels. The idea being that these were stories which had survived, had persisted, because they tell us truths about ourselves, which they certainly do. But I think the background presumption brought to our study and our reading of the classics and of Greek mythology was the kind of thought expressed by the German philosopher Feuerbach when he said, God is man writ large. And I think that's how we approached the Greek gods. That the Greek gods and their dramas were really a projection of our understanding of ourselves, that we had in the past created this canvas on which to paint our understanding of human beings. We wrote it large as the stories of the gods. And so if there was truth in these stories, it was human or psychological truth, such as you might find in Jane Austen or Winnie the Pooh. And it was really in that kind of, with that kind of perspective that we looked at the ancient Greek stories. And that is not to put down Jane Austen or Winnie the Pooh, because I think those have survived because they tell us truths about ourselves. Winnie the Pooh is profound literature full of archetypes in the colloquial sense. And so in the Greek stories, we expected to find the archetypal elopement, the archetypal mother's boy, the archetypal father-son competition, the archetypal leader who can't lead from the second chair, the archetypal hero, the archetypal trickster. And we would expect to derive perhaps some moral take-home lessons from these stories. One day, young man, you must be your own master. One day you must replace your father. Don't disobey your boss. That can lead to unhappy situations. Or to be strong, you must be conscious of your weakness. Or never trust Greeks bearing gifts, etc., etc. We would expect to come away with some moral lesson from these stories. And I never quite understood the moral we were supposed to take from Daedalus and Icarus, especially in an educational establishment. But essentially, that was the idea. These were fictions given to reflect on human behavior and perhaps teach some moral tales. Now, everything we've looked at today tells us that there are other layers to the stories of the Greek gods, and that there was so much wisdom in the knowledge of the ancient Greeks, information about humanity, information about other powers and principles and the workings of the cosmos. But returning to how we relate to the stories of the gods, of course, universal truths can be learned from particular experiences. Was there something experiential at the root of these stories? Moral lessons can be learned from historical events. Was there something historical in any of these stories? Well, when in 1870, Heinrich Schliemann discovered Troy, he made that point emphatically for the world to see, that texts that may be full of wonderful psychology and esoteric meanings might very well have real history and real geography and real geopolitics embedded in it as well. Heinrich Schliemann, when he unearthed Troy, showed that Homer's Iliad had real world history, real geography, and real geopolitics embedded in it. And Schliemann was not the first person to connect Greek myth with the real world of history and geography. Now, to find history in a story is, of course, not to exclude other esoteric layers. And I learned this from my study of the Bible. My background is as a preacher and a pastor. I was 33 years in church-based ministry, and I worked as a church doctor, an archdeacon for the Anglican Church in Australia. and a theological educator. And one of the things I taught was hermeneutics, the principles of interpreting ancient texts. And it was in that capacity that I learned and taught that stories can carry a whole layer of narratives, many layers of narratives and implications from them. So for a biblical example, you go to the story of the patriarch Joseph. And Joseph is presented as an ideological tale, an explanation for how we got here. And so the story of Joseph explains how the Hebrew people arrived in Egypt. It explains how the Hebrew people became dispossessed and became a nomadic people. But the way the story is told, it's very clearly also a story of personal development. It's a Hebrew iteration of the hero's journey, and it very much works that way. And once you start looking at the meaning of the names of the characters in that story, you realize there are probably esoteric meanings layered into the telling of the story as well. And of course, that's where the Kabbalah goes, to the esoteric meanings that have been embedded within the current telling of these ancient stories. Story can work that way. Now, some of us are here because of our interest in a particular layer. So some of us are here today because we're interested in Greek mythology as esoterica. And that's a very long-lasting journey. There is so much wisdom to be found that way. I absolutely loved what Marguerite was bringing us earlier today. And I am very appetitious to learn more of that. But if that's why we're here, perhaps we can also be open to journeying with Greek mythology as a reflection of prehistory and human memory. And those of us who are here because we relate to Greek story as psychology, or perhaps we can further our understanding of it by relating it to other ancestral story, which can open up what may be to us hidden or esoteric layers. So for instance, there was a time when we could only read the challenges of Heracles as epic fiction. I mean, a hybrid human jostling with other kinds of hybrid human and mixed creatures, what else could it be? But if we read the challenges of Heracles alongside the Epic of Gilgamesh, or the Hebrew story of Jacob and Esau, or along the modern science of Homo neanderthalis, Denisova, and the Dragon Man from China, or read it alongside the world's dragon narratives, well, other layers open up. I wonder if the story of Heracles might relate to the story of the emergence of Homo sapiens sapiens as the alpha species on planet Earth. Do these other narratives shine light on the Greek mythology and invite us to ask different questions of it? Sometimes the hidden layer, the esoteric layer, might actually prove to be an historic layer. And Heinrich Schliemann was not the first person to propose this. So, for instance, to echo what Neil told us, and Neil, I absolutely am in awe of that presentation. I'm going to go back over it. I'm going to download those slides and really study them. I was amazed by some of the parallels between what we've done to our understanding of Pythagoras with what we've done to our understanding of Plato, for instance, but I'll come back to this. So Neil mentioned that Pythagoras prefigured today's modern gravitational theories and harmonic and sound healing. Aristarchus taught us that the earth revolves around the sun. How long did it take us to recover that and understand that that is real world cosmology? Thales taught that everything is made from water. Well, that's only 2 oxygen atoms from modern real world atomic theory. Anaximander, Anaximenes would seem to be prefiguring what we're learning now about the fabric of space and what matter actually is. Or are we relearning something that really was understood in quite a sophisticated way in the deep past? We learn to ask different questions of these ancient stories with the discoveries we make in the present. Another person to bring Greek wisdom and story to history was a man called Yosef ben Matthias, known to the world as Flavius Josephus, the first century Jewish historian. I was very interested to discover in my research for Escaping from Eden that Josephus appealed to Greek mythology as to history. And in particular, he appealed to the clash of the Titans as history. And so the Greek myth in which Uranus and Earth come together and create the Titans has a very nuts and bolts layer to it if you read it through the lens of Josephus. Non-terrestrial mingling with terrestrial makes for new kinds of beings, similar to humans, but much bigger, much cleverer. They are leaders, they are the men of legend. And we hear echoes of that clash of the Titans in the worldview of Pythagoras and Plato. Now, Josephus recognized that as a parallel of the narrative to be found in Genesis 6 in the Bible. That's the story in which human females are abducted by Bene Elohim, and they create hybrid offspring called the Nephilim, the giants, the men of legend. And Josephus says, these men of legend are what the ancient Greeks called the Titans. And there are still Titans today. Their descendants are among us. Descendants or throwbacks are among us. We have one or two on display in the present day, says Josephus while he's writing. And so what I found fascinating there is that he's referring to the clash of the Titans in Greek mythology, Genesis 6 in the Bible, as history. History that could be correlated with objective evidence in the present day. Now, we never learned Greek mythology that way at school. We did not expect to find history in it or anything like it. I mean, non-terrestrial intelligent beings abducting and hybridizing with human beings, how could that be history? Of course, there are other parallels to that in Norse, Celtic, and Mesopotamian story, but that will be for another presentation. Another place in which Greek legend meets history is Greece itself. And like Ed, I was very privileged to travel to Knossos. I went there in 1985. And when you go to these ancient sites, whether it's Knossos or the pyramids in Giza, it is confronting. It's very confronting and very humbling, because you look at the place in which you're standing and you have to ask, where did all this go? Where did it come from? And where did it go? What was lost in terms of wisdom, knowledge, civilization? It's disturbing to think a civilization this powerful, this advanced could seem to evaporate somehow. But it's very humbling, because you then look at what was achieved in the distant past and you ask, who are we? If we're not the first megalithic civilization, who are we? If we're not the first to have an understanding of cosmology, who are we? If the pioneering work we're doing now in healing using vibration was known thousands of years ago, who are we? It's very humbling. It's very confronting. Well, as a youngster, which I was in 1985, the thing that struck me was, how did these people know how to build on this scale with such sophistication? I mean, they've got sanitation systems, they've got air conditioning systems. And so I asked the guide, where did the Minoans, the culture who built all this, get their advanced knowledge and technology from? And so the guide told us a story. And he said the Minoan culture comes from the patriarch Minos. And Minos was the hybrid son of Europa and Zeus. Europa was a daughter of the king of Phoenicia. So we're now in real world geography, daughter of the king of Phoenicia, and she was abducted by a non-human entity called Zeus. They produced hybrid children, 3 boys. One of them was Minos, and he was the progenitor of the Minoan culture, which built all these buildings. And he told me that in the way he had learned it at school as history. These are the stories of origins in Greece. These are the stories of origins in Europe. The whole of Europe is named after that girl who was abducted by the non-human entity. Europe's a real place, isn't it? And it intrigued me that he presented this as, well, this is the history of this place. He didn't say, let me tell you a fable some of the locals tell. And so I found that quite challenging, but it intrigued me because, of course, the Minoan culture is not the only culture to claim a non-human entity or a hybrid entity as the progenitor of that culture. And you have to raise an eyebrow as you see that motif repeat. And by the way, I should say, I just loved how Ed captured that feeling of being humbled when standing in these places full of such ancient heritage. And if you can go to any of these places, absolutely do, because it's a life-changing experience that you have there. Now, something to note from that story of Europa and Zeus that took me by surprise when I discovered it, and that was to learn that Zeus died. He was killed in a battle. And so when I had come to the stories of the Greek gods, I had brought with me other ideas about gods. I thought gods were immortal. I thought gods were sort of transcendent, multidimensional beings. The idea that you could fall over dead in a battle if you were a god was not part of my worldview. And so I found it interesting how the Greek stories of the gods dethrones that god language. And you have to ask, all right, well, what kind of entity are we talking about? You look at the stories of the Greek gods, they're flawed, they're fractious, and they're mortal. And again, in that story of Europa, there's abduction, there's hybridization, there's offspring who are large and clever, and Minos becomes the progenitor. And it's part of a family of stories around the world. And so I think it's interesting to read the Greek stories alongside other world mythology and see if that brings different questions to these stories. Another place where Greek myth meets history is in the work of Plato, somebody I'm a huge fan of. And as you read my series of books, Escaping from Eden, then The Scars of Eden, then Echoes of Eden, you will get an impression of how Plato is really leading me in my thinking and my reframing, and I think has something profound to offer the world today, just as he did 2.5 millennia ago. I think it's a wonderful testimony that he's been in print all this time, and getting used to his style and learning to read him is a very rewarding journey indeed that I'd recommend to absolutely anybody. The thing I'm going to mention about Plato here is that he brought to philosophical conversation and scientific conversation and worldview information that really was global, just as Pythagoras did. He brought information that was Eastern, that was African, and he synthesized it in an incredible way and then presented it in a way that he argued for on the basis of logic. But it's another source of information that I'm going to focus on now, and that's the information that he gained from a transpersonal experience, from a transformational experience he had in the company of the Eleusinian sect, in the Eleusinian complex overlooking the city of ancient Athens. Now, the Eleusinian sect, which we heard a little bit about from Marguerite, had maintained a tradition which had drawn from ancient Greek myths not only stories, but protocols for brokering contact experiences with these other kinds of beings, with transdimensional beings. Ceremonies that were, in essence, near-death protocols, very carefully curated to take the initiate to the gateway to other worlds, to have contact with other realms, other entities, so that they could have a rebirth experience for the sake of higher consciousness and a better human life. So they could have a rebirth experience that would be for transformation and what we might call ascension. And Plato describes the experience in intimate detail. And then he describes the shifts in his worldview that resulted from that experience. Now, he puts this all on the lips of Socrates, but he does it with such interior detail. I happen to believe the two of them had both partaken of the Kukion ceremony of the Eleusinian mysteries. The idea that other dimensions are real and that more advanced, more intelligent, non-human entities are real and willing to interact with us. The idea that previous civilizations are real and that wisdom can be taken from them. Those ideas entered world philosophy and the scientific conversation of the world because of Plato. These ideas were put forward for peer review and for your consideration by Plato and have remained there in black and white ever since. And just as we were taught to read Greek story in a particular way at school, so we were taught to read Plato in a particular way when I read him at theological college. And unfortunately, these life-changing aspects were sort of extracurricular, and we focused on other stuff. Now I've had to return to Plato and think, how could we miss that out? So Plato brings concepts such as reincarnation, higher consciousness, rebirth for higher consciousness, the ideas of holographic universe, the ideas of populated universe, brings them from Africa, brings them from India, brings them from the wider world, from these profound personal experiences, and introduces them to the conversation for the world at large. I think the idea that the ancient Greek mythos can inform your understanding of history, can inform your cosmology, and can transform your experience and your level of consciousness today, I think that is really revolutionary. And of course, the experiential aspect is still open to us today because psychoaffective tea ceremonies are still part of the shamanic offering of the world around the world. And there'll be people present today who know exactly what Plato was talking about when he described those experiences. And so that, saying that is a reminder that Greek protocols, as well as Greek stories, don't exist in a bubble. They are part of a world of ancestral narratives full of information, as I spoke of before, cosmology, atomic theory, energy healing, so on and so forth. And so I'm reminded that Greek myth does not exist in a bubble. I can think of a parallel that really interests me. When I had written Escaping from Eden, I learned from members of my family about the Mamiwata tradition, from out of Ghana. And Mami Wata is an ancient tradition that says that you will never have a full understanding of what happens on planet Earth until you recognize there's a non-human layer to the story of Earth, to the story of humanity. And the Mami Wata tradition talks about abduction experiences in which advanced neighbors abduct, sometimes it's females, often it's males, and take them to an underworld, specifically to undersea bases where they are used for hybridization, and they're not abused. And often the people who return from these experiences say, actually, I was treated in a beautiful and wonderful way, and I was very happy while I was there, except for the fact that I couldn't contact you, my family of origin. And I'm very closely connected with people who have had these experiences and returned with physical evidences of the stories they've told. So I learned of that from Ghana. And then, as if you read The Scars of Eden, you'll realize that took me on a journey all around the world to learn that that testimony exists in cultures all around the world. It's there in Ghana, it's there in Kenya. The story is told all the way down to the southern cone of Africa. You can hear it in the Yamoya stories of the Caribbean. You can hear it in the Luo people's story of Nyamgod to Wad Umbari from the 1500s. You can hear it in the Welsh story of Tylwyth Teg. You can hear it in the Fey stories of Scotland and Ireland, the stories of the Encantos from the Philippines. And when you notice the correlation of very detailed aspects of those stories, if you know Greek story, you will hear echoes of the Demeter, Hades, and Persephone, and story of the Sirens. It will take you back to that story to ask different questions. Now, this is in no way to deconstruct the esoteric meaning that's embedded in the telling of that story. But I think when you set it in that context, you will think maybe there is human memory embedded in that story as well. And parthenogenesis may have roots not just in ancient story, but in ancient experience. Ancient experiences of hybridization and what today we would call cloning. Experience that goes back to a period when our development as a species was being modified, and when the genderization and sexualization of our ancestors was occurring. I think there are many layers to that story, whether we're looking at the Greek telling or the Ghanaian or the Welsh or the Scottish or the Filipino telling. Zeus and Prometheus is another story I love because it's a story of a human upgrade that you can find in ancestral narratives all around the world. It echoes the Sumerian story of the conflict between Enlil and Enki. So as Zeus is the senior, Prometheus is the leader in the second chair, to use that analogy. Well, Enlil is the leader, Enki is the number two. It echoes the Yahweh and serpent story from the biblical narrative. They all talk about a moment of upgrading the consciousness and intelligence. Prometheus is upgrading humanity to a technological species with specific technology, whether that's fire, or some people read that as firepower. And Zeus thinks this is an idiotic decision and feels Prometheus was totally out of order and had broken rank to have done such a stupid thing. Well, these conversations and conflicts absolutely echo in the Enlil, Enki, Yahweh, and the serpent stories. And then the notes that accompany the story are the same as well, because with the upgrade, in all these versions of the story comes the sexualization of humanity. And now we have humanity made male and female. Now we have humanity made fertile. And now we have the introduction of sickness and death. It's all there in the Greek telling and Sumerian and biblical. You can find it in the Nigerian telling of the story. The Efik people tell the story of a Bassi and a Tai. and you'll find Pandora's box in the Nigerian telling of the story. Pandora's box is a bastionetized device for managing the upgraded humanity, kind of a punishment for being too capable, too technological, and too clever. Now, as I said at the outset, I am an absolute beginner in Greek mythology, but it's parallels like these that really catch my attention and make me want to return to Greek stories with an eye to many layers, not expect to find that they are stories of a single layer, and to ask different questions than I may have asked in school. There is more than one way to listen to these ancient stories, and I think it's helpful not to speak of Greek myths, but of Greek wisdom. And as I explore Greek wisdom, like Heinrich Schliemann, I will expect to learn about geopolitics, ancient and modern. Like Aristarchus and Anaximander, I will expect to find cosmology. Like Flavius Josephus, I will expect to learn about history and human origins. And like Plato, Socrates, and Pythagoras, I will expect my experience of present reality and my very level of consciousness to be transformed by what I find in ancient Greece. And I'll pause there. Back to you, Neil.
Hey, brother. Sorry, I was getting some water. Okay.
Okay.
All right. If anybody has any questions, please do. Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
I haven't been watching the clock very closely, so I hope we're more or less on schedule at this point.
No, you're good. You have quite a lot of time left. So
that allows us to have a conversation, which I was hoping for.
Exactly. So I had a couple comments, and if anybody has any comments or questions or things you want us to talk deeper about, please go ahead and post in the chat. All right. So for me, when you said, if we're not the first, who are we? If this is the healing work that was done before, who are we? Those are really profound philosophical questions even, right? Like, if this has happened before, we're not just evolving linearly and now we're able to like expand, but we've done this before. What does this really mean? Is that kind of what you're referring to there? You want to elaborate on that?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I think, when I went to school, I was given the impression that humanity had been evolving like this, gradually getting cleverer and cleverer and clever. And the meta-narrative is ancestors stupid, us clever. And you go to these places and you realize that's not true. And that there has been civilization here before the civilization we know about. And as soon as you see evidence for one pivot in world history that way, it opens up the question of how many pivots have there been? And of course, Plato suggested there had been many. But then it alters your relationship with what we do know from the ancient past, because instead of reading classics, to write essays, you start reading classics to learn, to recover ancient wisdom. And if we want to progress, for instance, in our understanding, let's talk about energy healing, sound healing. I mean, you can find iterations of this in alternative health scene, but you can also find it in scientific hospitals where we're learning to use light to heal. If we can realize that by doing this, we are recovering knowledge that was there in the deep past, then of course we will relate to our ancestors differently. Of course we will read Pythagoras differently. And as I hinted, there have been periods where we didn't have the knowledge to give Pythagoras the respect he deserved. And you brought that out beautifully in your presentation. We didn't have the knowledge to give Plato the respect he deserved. Now we know enough that we should know to go back and listen with a more open ear and say, well, what did they know about these things? And so the idea of our evolution, our development, isn't this, movement into the future. It has to be a movement into the past as well. And I think that's what I mean about being humbled and asking, who are we? Because we are learners. We are learners, and we have seniors and elders and ancestors to learn from. And if we listen to greats like Plato, we have helpers to help us in that learning as well. So I think there's a whole multifaceted journey of discovery and ascension that becomes possible if you're willing to be humbled, even by the megalithic record of our planet in that way. And many people who go to these places, like I did as a tourist, come home very pensive and thoughtful for exactly those reasons.
Right. You mean like they visit the place and then they see the epicness, if you will, and of what they've created, and start maybe questioning the ancient narrative of them being primitive, right, compared to us now?
That's right, but also with an appetite to recover lost wisdom.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. So you said here also that there have been many pivots, right? And when you say that, I think about the Yuga cycles. You're familiar with the Yuga cycles, right? Cycles of time, the evolution, the devolution of consciousness, and the whole concept that we're going through an evolution right now. So it's almost like many pivots could seem like there have been many cycles, and we don't really even know how many cycles there are. If we're just looking at, say the last 13,000 years ago, right? And us being maybe at a golden age 13,000 years ago. And even that is like barely provable at this point. We're just getting to proving that, right? There could have been so many more advanced civilizations that existed before that we may never even be able to get an opportunity to find out from, what happened.
True. I mean, if you discover there was a civilization before, probably the first thing you're going to want to know is, how did they get destroyed? Because we don't want to. What's the lesson we need to learn from this ancient story? But then when you take it to another level and relate it to Yuga cycles, you ask on another level, well, what is the syllabus for this cycle? What are we supposed to learn this time around? What is it we have to do to get to a golden age? And it's interesting, with all the turbulence of the last couple of years, I think has put that question to a lot of people in society at large. We can see the push and pull of governing dynamics around the planet. And I think a lot of people are asking, how can we avoid going down what looks like a very dark track? How can we flip it the other way so that we actually learn what we're supposed to learn, so that we can achieve a golden age, so that we can have a better human experience? And I'm not an expert in the Yuga cycles, but I think I would like to learn more about that, because I want to know, what's the syllabus? What are we supposed to be learning this time around? It's not just a question of survival. It's a matter of, can we be the best iteration of humanity that's possible?
Yes. The whole thing of the reason why I explore the ancient past so much, some people within, that come to our events are really into more of the spiritual understanding rather than the historic understanding. And I've also had the question of like, why exploring so much about the past is about empowering the present and being in the now. But you really outlined it here. We have this arrogance that has been collectively adopted by even spiritual people, that we are the most advanced that we've ever been. And but when we look at the ancient past and we see that technology and consciousness don't have to raise at the same time. There are definitely technologically advanced cultures in the past, probably, from your research and many others, we see this. But then also there were higher levels of consciousness communities that maybe didn't need computers and different things like that. And they did get destroyed. So what we can learn from our ancient past is not only hidden truths about who we are and the nature of reality, but also how to avoid these cycles of time so that we don't have to restart all over again. We can continue evolving.
Yes, that's right. I think that's kind of what makes the contemporary myth of Wakanda so resonant. The idea that you could have higher consciousness and the technology to preserve that wisdom and to preserve that tradition, and not be the very conscious indigenous people who get conquered by the people who've got higher tech but aren't very bright socially, which has sort of been world history. And I love the way the Wakanda story puts a question mark over all of that and saying, wouldn't it be great if consciousness was not trumped by technology? And wouldn't it be great if there really were a thriving indigenous tradition that we can sit at the feet of and learn from? Well, the fact is our indigenous traditions, even though we've done our level best to extinguish them over the last couple of thousands of years, they have survived, and much of their wisdom has survived. And I think part of the humbling that I think many of us need is to go back to sources that we've dismissed in the past because they were the losers of history, and say, no, actually, they're the carriers of the wisdom that we need. If I'm suddenly realizing that what I'm learning at school and off the TV is not scratching where it's itching, is not giving me the information and the empowerment that I need, where will I go? Well, you go to the narratives that have survived at the grassroots. You go to the indigenous traditions that have persisted through history and carried the kind of information that I've referred to, and that's echoed in the Greek legends as well. You know, sometimes these stories survive as the Greek myths have, but they are sidelined because we're taught to regard them in a particular way. And that's a more subtle way of conquering and sidelining previous wisdom of previous cultures. And again, that's sort of what I was hinting at. Can we go back to these stories and ask a fresh layer of questions?
And in this book, or is it your next book coming out, where you're going to have more stories from indigenous? Because you've done this yourself. You do this research, not just you know, when it comes to biblical truth, but worldwide indigenous communities.
Yes, that's what I do in Echoes of Eden, really. Go back to those sources and just see what it is that's being offered, because I think when in the past conquering powers suppressed indigenous story, it wasn't just because they didn't like our ancestors' stories about ETs. I think what they were really worried about was the narratives and protocols that relate to the empowerment of human society. You know, conquering powers want to govern society. They don't want empowered society. That's the very opposite of what you want when you conquer. And so it's sort of a smoking gun. The history of conquests and imperial invasions is a smoking gun, literally, around the world, saying, you go and look at what they try to suppress, because it is all about empowering human beings for a better, more conscious human experience. And that's what Echoes of Eden is really all about.
Right. So in regards to Greek culture and Minoans, right? Minoans heavily influenced Greek culture, but there were other tribes also that kind of merged with Minoans during the time of the Trojans. Do you know at all the range of, was there a tribe before that? Are you aware of anything before the Minoans? Do you know how many thousands of years Greek culture was, like, you know, flourishing in that area?
No, I don't, but I'm really fascinated by that because of hints in some of the story that really would appear to be thousands, if not tens of thousands of years old. And so some of the cosmic information hints at the story of our solar system, for instance, references to the arrival of the moon, for instance, and the people who were here before the moon arrived. That's there in the wider Greek corpus. So no, I don't, but I would love to probe that, because it goes back a whole lot further than we think it does, and the information has survived a lot longer than we think it has.
You know, there's a university called Ananda University. Have you heard of it?
No.
Okay, so based out of they're followers of Yogananda, right? But they're like, it's not dogmatic to the point where it's just Yogananda. It's like a couple of disciples after him, and then also Yogananda's teacher. So basically, they have like communities all over the U.S. and they're huge into Yuga cycle information. So I just got certified Yuga Cycle teacher training from them. So I just got certified in advanced Yuga Cycle training because I was just,
All
it was
right.
my COVID project, you know?
I am
And
coming to your first seminar then.
I'm putting together one just on Yuga Cycles for 3 hours, so I'll let you know about
wonderful.
it. But
Thank you.
what they do is they take people to Greece once a year to show ancient Greece over thousands of years, to show how the consciousness devolved and evolved over the Yuga Cycles. You know, so I thought that was very interesting. They specifically have scholars dedicated to Yuga Cycle awareness of Greece, and that's who they fly out there to. So it's interesting because it goes to your point that they've been around for thousands of years, and the culture obviously through thousands of years went through different cycles of, you know, forgetfulness, remembering, all that.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's interesting. The forgetfulness. I just mentioned this, and this is information I have not from Greek mythology, but from Aboriginal Australian story. And that is that the forgetting of what has gone before is not it's not an accident, and it's not just the product of empires cancelling out the culture that they've conquered. That when you listen to elders of traditional cultures, indigenous traditions, there is the sense that we're not allowed to speak of the civilization that was here before. And whether that is to protect humanity from traumatization, or whether it's because the learning exercise actually requires that, I'm not sure. But I'm just intrigued that there is this other layer to the forgetting that operates at a much higher level than the political level that I was just talking about.
Yeah, and that's interesting because that sounds like, you know, in Egypt, for example, there's so much evidence pointing it to be like at least 12,000 years old, the Sphinx. And a lot of people say that the fall of Atlantis happened at the Younger Dryas period, the end of the last ice age, same time, and that Egypt was basically a creation of Atlantis, like an offset of it, right? And even Thoth was known as Thoth the Atlantean. But when you go and look in ancient Egyptian scripture, you have all this advanced awareness that they say came from somewhere, but there's no real talk about exactly where it came from.
No, that's right. I mean, I remember when I was in Egypt and I went to the Giza Plain, and we had fascinating conversations with the guides. And whenever we came to something that was really, really advanced, it was, oh, well, that's pre-dynastic Egypt. We don't know much about that. And it was just so interesting that this phrase pre-dynastic was almost seen as a we don't have to explain. Once we've used that phrase, pre-dynastic Egypt, well, they were very, very clever, but we never quite got to, well, who were they? Who were they? Because if we study history in a conventional sense, before the pyramids, as they have been dated, all you've got is farming. You don't go from farming to building pyramids. And then you've got this mystery pre-dynastic Egypt that's more advanced. But what I love is that the guides are often very frank and very straightforward. Sometimes they'll say, which answer would you like? and you can take your choice. But I think that what you were just saying about the timing, I agree with that, about putting the pyramids in that period that is closed by the Younger Dryas cold period and the cataclysms associated with it. So you've got massive flooding at the beginning of that period and at the end of it. And of course, it is the flood damage that I think is the real smoking gun pointing to the much, much older age of the Giza Plain than you or I were taught at school.
Exactly. You know, for a lot of ancient cultures, and I want to, since you have some time, we have like, can we go a little over? Is that okay? Because now we're just getting started, man. Just getting warmed up. Because I would love your input in real time on a few things. So firstly, like I see in a lot of ancient cultures, I did a whole like 2-3 hour presentation on origin stories of humanity. And it was just like, I went through 300 different origin stories. I categorized them by topic. And you were saying earlier that if we could listen to what the indigenous said, we could pull a lot of things out of it. And that sparked in me the awareness that a lot of these origin stories, or even just ancient texts, are metaphors for some advanced sciences and occurrences in the universe, right?
Yes.
So have you come across that in your research?
Well, I think that when you listen to the stories of how human beings were made, if you listen to the Sumerian story and the biblical and the Mayan story and the Popol Vuh, they all talk in very similar terms about a clay being created and then something extracted from the body of one of the advanced beings and introduced into the clay to generate a either a human being or a different kind of human being, and that's the process that's being used. And there's an amazing moment in the Genesis version of that story where the human that they have taken the genetic material from to generate the next human says in wonder, this is bone of my bone, this is flesh of my flesh. He's looking at another human being knowing it's been taken from him. And I read that and I think, if I was a pre-technological human being, then isn't that exactly how I would describe a cloning process? We've got something in a test tube, some substance, which is called clay or mud. And then we've got something that's being taken from another body. It's being introduced into that in order to generate a new life form. Well, with a 21st century mind, you look at that and you say, oh, I think I know what we're talking about. What I find amazing is that I think the memory of that, which is a traumatizing memory if you think about it, has been carried very faithfully in a visual form. It's a visual memory that's being reported, and visual memory with different language, different metaphor, but sometimes the same metaphor. And that's one of a number of examples where the parallels are between visual memories and tell stories that we have language for today, that perhaps 500 years ago we didn't have any language for, and so we could only read it as a story of magic. Now we can read it as a story of technology. And when you put it in the context of the wider story, what they are doing, which is modifying life forms until they get to Homo sapiens sapiens, it makes perfect sense to say that is a pictorial explanation of cloning. That is what the engineers, the progenitors of the Popol Vuh were doing. That's what the sky people of the Sumerian stories were doing. Right. That's what the powerful ones of the biblical narrative were doing. So that's just one example. And I think, in a way, you could call those stories apocalyptic literature, in the sense that in apocalyptic literature, what you have is the writer describing something that was seen and not understood. And so the writer's simply going to tell you what was seen to let you, the reader, interpret it. Hence the phrase, let he who has ears to hear, hear. And I think that that's the gift of that kind of literature. We've been given visual memory, and then we're invited to say, do you understand what we're telling you?
All right, so we have a question from Pia here. Wonderful thoughts and inspiration. Visited Knossos many years ago as well. You brought back memories. Any insight about the labyrinth there? It is not round as in Chartres, like your conversation. Thank you so much.
No, I don't. I'm really sorry not to have information about that, but I am interested in labyrinths because I think the way we relate to labyrinths today is as devices to tap our subconscious. I think it would be fair to say. And unfortunately, I was just too young when I was there to test that theory in situ. But I think probably that's probably the question I'd like to take with me to that site. But I don't have any information, unfortunately, that I can share on that.
Paul, let's go to Greece with Ed. That'd be fun. We should go. We have
I think we definitely should. I have so missed traveling the world in the last couple of years.
yeah.
And now at the having written Echoes of Eden in particular, I think I've got to go back to some of these places I've been before, because I just didn't have all my questions ready this time around. So we've got to go there. And I'd love to go with you, Neil, to Brazil and to some of
Ah,
the harvest festivals that happen in Brazil, and just see what we pick up, what questions we might bring to the memory that's been preserved there, because there's indigenous Brazilian memory and there's African memory that has been maintained through all kinds of customs and protocols. And I think you and I would have a wonderful time there as well.
oh
And of
yeah,
course, we've
man.
got to go to Giza as well. There's so many
Okay,
places,
let's go.
but
Well,
I think Athens and Brazil are probably my top two.
we're doing a Portal to Ascension tour to Egypt in September next year. So if you
So
want
you
to
got that
come,
covered. You've got that
yeah,
covered.
but you should come. And then I'm going to be living in the UK for 5 months next year, and I'm going to be traveling around Europe. So I'll contact you. Maybe we can
Oh,
put something
wow.
up.
Plenty to
Yeah,
see there.
yeah, let's do it. All right. So we have a comment from Ed. Labyrinth was the name of the Minoan ritual double axe. Labyrinthos means house of the sacred axe, a very different type of maze with a different purpose.
Oh,
Hmm.
nice. All right. That's something I need to learn about.
Right. So what you were saying about, just the clay and the hybridization and all that. I mean, one of the biggest smoking guns is the fact there's no transitory fossils in the fossil record from Homo erectus to Homo sapien. They've still been looking for that for over 150 years. What's your comment on
Well,
that?
yes, that's right. Well, when I was at school, they were looking for the missing link. Now, of course, we have discovered that there was a great range of hominids on planet Earth who every one of them just seemed to appear in working form from out of nowhere with no backstory. So we're now looking for multiple missing links to
Wow.
explain where we all came from. And I think I love that, because it has
Yeah.
just, these discoveries in the last 10, 20 years have really emphasized our not knowing about where we all came from. I also love it because, again, in the past, we didn't have the knowledge to take ancient stories seriously. And so when we read stories of giants, well, that's just a fable. When we read stories of hobbits, well, that's just a fable. Well, in the 1800s, we actually dug up a lot of giants. And now in the 21st century, we've dug up some hobbits. And so the idea that our stories may have carried real memory of sharing the planet with different kinds of hominid, well, now that has wheels in the fossil record. So there's always more to discover, but it actually makes the story all the more challenging to our conventional theories, because we haven't found the missing link. We found the need for more missing links to support the old story. And I think, to my mind, it makes even stronger the possibility that we were the result of a lot of experimentation by some intelligent interference in our development as a species.
It just gave me chills, man. Just thinking of that, It's so I never even tracked the other hominoids. I was just looking at Homo sapien. So that just like completely just validates even more, I feel. Yeah, exactly. That it proves the story that we're actually thinking that happened. There was multiple hybridization experiments until we came about over anything else.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's right. It's one of the reasons I love the Popol Vuh, because it's very open about the fact that it was a very long period of experimentation and that there were many dead ends, that the goal of the progenitors was to produce people who were smart enough to work for them, and that there were many creatures produced who couldn't do that. They might have been very capable physically, but they had no interest in serving superiors. So that's a mistake at the level of engineering a gorilla and then finding it doesn't want to bring you your afternoon tea and slippers. And there's a great humility, I think, in the telling of the story, that's saying it took these many attempts until we got to Homo sapiens sapiens. And then it gets, in a way, quite specific about the change in strategy to get us. And it was that that final hybridization that they refer to. And there's the language of the supernatural in the telling of the story. It was a direct intervention. But again, you read it in the context of all the experiments and you realize, oh, what they've actually done is just spliced a whole lot of their own DNA into the mix. And then they produce us, but actually we're a bit too smart. And so this is where we get to the Zeus and Prometheus moment, where how do we manage a humanity that should not have been advanced to this point? Oh, well, let's introduce the female of the species in Pandora's box. Same story told by the Nigerians. How do we manage this very capable human race? Well, we'll introduce devices to make them physically and emotionally and mentally ill, so that they're always struggling and distressed, and then we can manage that. And it's another part of the story that echoes, but it follows this moment where they've said, okay, this hasn't been working, let's give them a bit more of us. And the discussion is there in the Bible. We don't want them too much like us, it says in Genesis, and the same conversation between Enlil and Enki. We don't want them too much like us. Same in the epic story. We don't want them to match our power. And we've overshot the mark. Now we have to dumb them down. Those correlations I find very interesting. It's there in the Greek, which we completely missed because we haven't expected to find any historical, biological information in that story. We're just expected to find the moral of the story.
Yeah, and that whole thing really goes to like dumbing them down. All that goes back to the Yuga cycle story, like, and you asked earlier, you'd be interested in knowing like the themes of the cycles and what the lessons are. So I just want to briefly let you know, and then just something really quick. And also the fact that the Trojan War occurred in between. So all the massive wars, the Mahabharata, the Trojan War, all occurred in between Yuga cycles, right? And in between Yuga cycles is a 200-year transitory phase from one cycle to the other. So basically shifting of the energies. So in the let's talk about so basically the Trojan War happened from the Treta Yuga, which is the Silver Age, into the Bronze Age, which is the Dwapara Yuga. The Dwapara Yuga, we descended and we entered the Kali Yuga around 700 BC. So the theme of the Kali Yuga is delusion, authority, and hierarchy. Okay, so basically you give up your power to authority. Everything's based on hierarchy. Even the way we talk about dimensions are hierarchical, right? Even though an ET, for example, probably won't see it the same way because we're not lesser than them. In many ways, we're as advanced or even chose to come here, right? And then you see delusion. I mean, like when all the stuff that's good for you has been considered bad for you, you know what I mean? Even when you go to a health food store, most of the stuff on the stores are considered health food, but still have high fructose corn syrup. It's like we have our minds and not on the prize, right? And then in 1700, we shifted from the Kali Yuga back to the Dwapara Yuga, but it was a 200-year transitory phase that ended in 1900. So what happened is the theme of the Dwapara Yuga that we're in now is the age of energy. So to get to the lesson of this age, what happened in 1700 and beyond was us finding energy. Electricity was the first discovery. And then we continued, and there was this whole revival of Pythagorean awareness, actually, that was atheistic, because Pythagoras was an atheist. There was a lot of Neo-Pythagoreans came about that were going against the church because of how, how about the church has become, right? So they were resurrecting Pythagoras' awareness in the 1700s and beyond, but they were doing it without God. Galileo, Newton, all that stuff. Then all of a sudden we hit the Dwapara Yuga, the energy age. What happened almost immediately after the energy age is we pierced through electricity and went to quantum physics, subatomic world. So as soon as we hit the Dwapara Yuga, we went even deeper into energy. And then what do you find with all these quantum physicists? They're spiritual. Atheism is no longer there. It's like Max Planck, Albert Einstein, Nikola Tesla, very highly conscious people, spiritual people. So just to end this right here, is the end goal of this age is it started with electricity, went into subatomic reality. We realize that we are energy and we become the masters of our energetic bodies. So that's basically the lesson.
I love that summary. What's amazing is that here we are with this great appetite to learn to understand the implications of the cosmos as energy, and then how we can participate in a more intelligent way. So here's the syllabus, and here's Pythagoras all this time ago giving us the tools to get into that.
Yeah.
And it just shows the prophetic power of an individual like that, who's born way ahead of this shift. But it means that we have the tools for the shift. The tools have been laid in the past for us to resurface and bring to the current task.
Yeah. And what's very amazing is if you look at when these avatars come on the planet, and you in ancient past, last few thousand years, and you look around the whole world, there's all these avatars incarnating at the same time, you know?
Oh, yes.
Bringing these messages.
At very pivotal moments. That's right.
Yeah. All right. So before we close out, Paul, I wanted to do something that'll take another 5 to 10 minutes. And, you know, this goes back to what you were talking about in regards to if we listen to our ancient past, we could understand things in so much more. How not to destroy ourselves, right? Cycles of time, even the Mayan calendar is showing us this. But one thing for sure is the science of how the universe is made. So I want to share screen, and this 2 creation stories I want to show you. One, I'm just going to go through is the Laguna Pueblo native tribe. And I want you to look at it from an avenue of science and quantum physics, comment on that, and then we'll close out with the origin story of the Greeks, and then we can comment on that, and then that'll be it for today. That work?
All right.
Let's do it. Okay, so this is my favorite creation story ever, and it's literally because, like, to me, this is like a very advanced understanding of the quantum world. So here we go. In the center of the universe, she sang. In the midst of the waters, she sang. In the midst of heaven, she sang. In the center, she sang. Her singing made all the worlds of the spirits, the worlds of the people, the worlds of the creatures, the worlds of the gods. In this way, she separated the quarters. Singing, she separated. Upon the face of heaven, she placed her song. Upon the face of water, she placed her song. Thus she placed her song. Thus she placed her will. Thus wove her design. Thus sang the spider. Thus she thought. What are your thoughts, Paul?
I was just struck that we begin with water, which is what happens in the stories from the Andes, the ancient Sumerian stories, the biblical story. And it was, I've forgotten the name, who said that everything was made of water.
Oh, Thales.
Thank you, Thales, that's right. So there's something there, isn't there? And then obviously we can say, well, that's a projection of the womb, of the Divine Mother. Yes, it may be that, but I also think it's an expression of memory, because I think all our creation stories happen after the forgetting that I talked about before, and they begin on a planet that's flooded. And the work of creation, which is really rehabilitation for the next cycle, begins in the waters, separating the waters. And then all that work of creation, in those words, is vibration.
Yes.
Is sound.
The singing is the vibration.
The singing, that's right. And so there's that theme again, which you can find in the Hebrew and many other traditions. I think there's something very deep we're being told about how things are created, how things are manifested. To put it at another level, how we get from codes to manifestations. So there's a sense of the holographic universe and Plato's forms in that as well. so I think there's a lot there that is talking about what is reality comprised of. It's comprised of frequencies. It's comprised of vibrations. And again, starting with the water, well, maybe we owe Thales a bit more respect.
Yeah, you're right. And then also the part here, okay, so basically, yeah, the frequency has been placed upon everything. And then at the end, it goes, thus wove her design, thus sang the spider, thus she thought. So it's like God's original thought was, what if I can be everything, right? And then the spider is interesting because we see the spider representing geometry because of the fractal web.
Yes.
You know, so it's like, this is a straight up metaphor for the science of creation, I feel.
It is. I think that's right. It's the fabric of space. It's the cosmos.
Right. All right. So let's jump into this here, the creation story one of Greek text. And also this is like, yeah, because what we just did, we just dissected that one and saw that there's a lot of truth to what we're now figuring out is the nature of reality. So this is the Greek creation story text, and this is how we will go for the rest of today. Is we're just going to do this story, and then we will not go further. We'll stop there, and then we'll comment on it, and then we'll close out for today, everybody. So let's do the Greek creation story. In the beginning, there was darkness. The only thing in this void was Nyx, a bird with black wings. With the wind, she laid a golden egg, and for ages she sat upon this egg. Finally, life began to stir in the egg, and out of it rose Eros, the god of love. One half of the shell rose into the air and became the sky, and the other became the earth, splitting up the heavens. I put that in parentheses because it's the same thing. Eros named the sky Uranus, and the earth he named Gaia, and Eros made them fall in love. Uranus and Gaia had many children together, and they eventually had grandchildren. Some of the children became afraid of the power of their children. Kronos, in an effort to protect himself, swallowed his children when they were still infants. However, his wife Rhea and hid his younger child. She gave him a rock wrapped in swaddling clothes, which he swallowed, thinking was his son. Once the child, Zeus, had reached manhood, his mother instructed him on how to trick his father to give up his brothers and sisters. Once this was accomplished, the children fought a mighty war against their father. After much fighting, the younger generation won. With Zeus as their leader, they began to furnish Gaia with life and Uranus with stars. Soon the earth lacked only two things, man and animals. Zeus then summoned his son Prometheus, which was forethought, and Epithous, which is afterthought. He told him to go to earth and create men and animals and give them each a gift. Prometheus set to work forming men in the image of gods, and Epimetheus worked on the animals. As Epimetheus worked, he gave each animal he created one of the gifts. After Epimetheus had completed his work, Prometheus finally finished making man. However, when he went to see what gift to give to man, Epimetheus shamefully informed him that he had foolishly used all the gifts, so there was no more gifts for man. All the animals received the gifts. Distressed, Prometheus decided he had to give man fire, even though gods were the only ones meant to have access to it. As the sun god rode out into the world the next morning, Prometheus took some of the fire and brought it back to man. When Zeus discovered Prometheus' deed, he became furious. He ordered his son to be chained to a mountain and for a vulture to peck out his liver every day until eternity. Then he began to devise a punishment for mankind. That's us. Another of his sons created a woman of great beauty, Pandora. Each of the gods gave her a gift. Zeus's present was curiosity in a box which he ordered her never to open. Then he presented her to Epimetheus as his wife. Pandora's life with Epimetheus was happy except for intense longing to open the box. She was convinced that because gods and goddesses had showered so many glorious gifts upon her, that this one would be wonderful. One day when Epimetheus was gone, she opened the box. Out of the box flew all the horrors which plague the world today: pain, sickness, envy, greed. Upon hearing Pandora's screams, Epimetheus rushed home and fastened the lid shut, but all the evils had already escaped. And I'll stop that one there. You want to comment on this, Paul?
Yes, well, I think if I'd learnt classics in years past, much would have been made of that last bit of the story, and it would all be presented as a warning. a warning about the female of the species, a warning about curiosity. And of course, this is, well, I say, of course, that's not how I read that story. And as I said earlier, I see echoes there with ancestral narratives from around the world that talk about this moment when we come into the experience of Homo sapiens as we know ourselves to be, and that's genderized, that's sexualized, and living in a world where we get sick, where we die, and where we struggle with things. And that's the arena in which we live and learn. So I just, it's sad really when you read stories and you can see how they have been used by people who want to project agendas onto the text. With that, you can say, well, are they really projecting? It does say it was a punishment, but when you read it in the family of narratives, I think you will quickly stop seeing it as a punishment and start seeing it as an explanation of this is the human experience as we know ourselves to be, since we became conscious, since we became fertile, since we became technological. This has been our experience. But going back to the beginning of the story, I was intrigued once again to notice that the creation work begins with wind. It's the same in the Bible, the Ruach. It's the same in the Sumerian, the four winds. It's the same in the Filipino story, Tagalog, creating the vortices of wind. And relating that to the idea of the breath of God, which is how it becomes understood, is a bit of a universal, really. I, again, think we're going back to memory. We're going back to visual memory. And then that story of Uranus and Earth coming together and having offspring, I think of the Zulu story of Unkulunkulu that says that all life on Earth came from the heavens, came from space, came in seed form, and then developed here. And that's really the ancient telling of the story of panspermia that says life did not originate on the planet. It came to the planet from space. And again, I wonder if there's a memory of a telling of that story that we have embedded in the Greek creation story. I loved the aspect of all the gifts being given to the animals. So now we've got to upgrade the humans in some other way. Right. And it's kind of comical. And that moment is comical in the Bible as well, which has been my entree into this realm, because you've got the creation of all the animals in the Bible, and then the God character is surprised when none of them works out as a mate for the human being. And the human's lonely and actually wants another human being. We've got a bit of an echo of that here, that we've got all the animals and then the woman comes after. What on earth is going on there? Then we get to the upgrade. And as I said before, so many stories around the world say the final upgrade made us too smart. And the anxiety of the gods was that we would become too much like the gods, or too much like the engineers. Perhaps they'd given us too much of their own DNA. I actually think they overshot because they didn't realize we carry all the gifts of the animals within us. I mean, that's really how genetic coding works. The genetic coding for all life on Earth arrived from space and seeded what's happened here. And I mean, how much of our DNA is junk DNA? We are full of animal heritage. And modern DNA researchers actually say we're full of the DNA coding of other life forms as well that we don't know about. And that's modern science. That's not me making it up. Yeah. So I actually think the reason they ended up with a Homo sapiens much smarter than they thought they were going to get was because they underestimated the gifts of the animals. They underestimated what we would bring with our animal heritage. You think of the incredible learning abilities of birds and problem solving of birds, problem solving of rats. You think of the sense of direction that birds and dogs have. You think of the telepathic connection that you can have with a dog, for instance. Um, those are just some, for instances. Well, that's intelligence, that's consciousness. And people who are close with animals, work with animals, people who work with horses, for instance, for the healing of people who are emotionally or psychologically damaged, know that horses have an intelligence that relates to human psychology. They know when a person is broken, and they know what they can do to help that person. This is all intelligence. This is all consciousness. It's all in our heritage. And I think when that got fused with the blood of Kingu or the rib of Adam, whatever the fusion was, that's when we got this amazing cocktail that is humanity as we know it, with this phenomenal capacity for imagination, love, compassion, creativity, that I think marks us out as an extraordinary species. And I think some of the memory of that is embedded in this story, even if it's not on face value as we tell the Greek creation story this way. Again, I would say once you put it alongside the biblical, the Mesopotamian, the Mesoamerican, the African, the Aboriginal Australian stories, and you notice the overlaps, I think that's when you realize there is information here that's not plain on the first reading, that is speaking to cultural memory of something very profound.
Right.
And it's about, and it really is about who we are and what we are.
Right. Yeah. The end here does have hints of the Garden of Eden story, right? Like a punishment. That Pandora's box is almost like the apple from the tree, the curiosity of what they're going to experience. And then, it's almost like the beginning of the fall from grace.
Yes, the beginning
right?
of suffering. That's right.
But which is interesting, because what you said was that it probably didn't happen in this way, but this is a take on it. And it's almost like that the take on this has been created by humans themselves. Like, we wrote our text about what happened to us from our memory. And even though it was probably meant to be, we're supposed to fall from grace so we can remember who we are, get the contrast of darkness, fully activate all of our gifts in our bodies that we were not maybe supposed to have. That was partly the reason why we came down here, which is a really beautiful divine mission. But humans, in retrospect, could be looking at it as like, why am I on this earth? Everything is suffering. I'm being punished, So it's almost like the humans' lower frequency take on what actually happened in the higher realms. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think you've put that really, really well. Yes, I think you put that very well. I think it can be, as you say, something that's spoken with that kind of annoyance and frustration.
Yeah.
Or it can be something that you say, wow, we are here on a journey of exploration and discovery. This is awesome. I'm going to discover everything I can.
Yes. Live fully.
Exactly.
Yeah, the beginning part is interesting too. So now let's just talk about the science, and we'll close this slide out. In the beginning was darkness. This is and the only thing in this was void. This is mainstream science, the void within the black hole, the singularity, the infinite singularity that existed, that burst into countless possibilities. This is like the Greek creation story is literally talking about that. And when we see like a bird with black wings, or we see a spider, or a cosmic egg, a golden egg is almost always referring to the infinite singularity in the middle. There was an egg,
yes,
and the egg cracked to create creation. It's talking about the Big Bang theory, basically, that there was something there, it expanded to everything. And the bird is so interesting because it's just like the spider. Basically, there was the center, there was the darkness, the void, and the bird flew across all of creation, laying eggs, which are all these galaxies and all this stuff, right? So it's just so beautiful. These stories.
It is. It's a beautiful metaphor. It's a visual way of describing something seeming to come from nothing, which of course is the great mystery. Plato, of course, argued that it wasn't nothing that everything came from. It wasn't nothing that the material universe came from. And I think when you put Plato along Einstein, it's rather fun, because Einstein's theory of general relativity told us and proved mathematically that energy, space, and time, matter, all began in the same moment. There's the singularity. And of course, it's mind-boggling to say that time began. But if that's right, that time began, then it informs our question, well, what went before? Because that's always the question. What was the planet like before it was like this? What was the solar system like before it was like this? What was the cosmos like before it was like this? And we go back in time with our befores. And Einstein says, if you keep doing that, you'll reach a point where before doesn't mean before anymore, because you're at the point where time begins. At the point where before no longer means before, Plato says you have a unified field of consciousness and intelligence, and that was the nothing that fractalized.
Whoa, I love that. It's paradoxical because in the void, there is still something, and so there's nothing and something. But the way I like to look at it is Shiva. Shiva's name translates to no thing, not nothing. It's just no thing, It's basically formless. The formless became the form.
Yes, but the egg's a good metaphor for it.
Oh, yeah, it is. Beautiful. All right, Paul, we're going to close up here, brother. But I want to just hand it back to you. And if you want to maybe just close us out with some words or something before we, finally end this. What's going on for you? What are you up to next? What are you inspired? What's your passions for? What's to come in the future?
Well, for me, the take home from all the research I've done for Escaping from Eden, The Scars of Eden, and Echoes of Eden has to do with who we are, what we're capable of, how we live as human beings. I love the language of energy because I think we sense intuitively that who we are as beings of consciousness relates to energy. And I think a lot of us in the last couple of years have been made to think about what kind of energy we are, what kind of vibration we're vibrating with. So that's something that's very much on my mind. And people who read the Eden series will see it's going there and wanting to bring some of the ancestral wisdom of the world to the questions of what we do with that, how we might live differently. So the next thing, I'm doing my series with Mauro Bellino on the fifth kind, which you can catch up on, and that goes back to my roots in biblical studies and how we get from there to all the territory that we've described today. But I think the take home for me is not just about understanding the past, understanding ancient texts and ancient narratives. It is about what's the human experience we can have now. And I love moments and communities like we're enjoying right now with Portal to Ascension, because we have taken a moment to be very intentional about what we're doing with our lives, what energy we're carrying, what we're projecting, what we're attracting to ourselves. And I think it's a time in which we need to encourage one another to keep doing that. And so, Neil, that's why I'm so appreciative of your work, being part of communities like the one you are creating, because I think that especially at this time, we're feeling it as a pivot in history, which I think it is, where we know we have to be very deliberate about what kind of lives we're going to live, what we're going to learn, what we're going to manifest, and tapping the wisdom of the ages, I think, is one of the best things you can do to inform the way ahead. So I applaud you for your work, Neil, and I'm very grateful to be a tiny part of it by joining you today.
Thank you, brother. That means so much from you. And I feel the same way about you. Every conversation we have, I'm also excited to have you on. And we can just keep going deeper and deeper. Now, there's so many pieces that we're just peeling back, pieces of the layer. And it's not about where we're going to end up. It's just about the exploration, the excitement of it. There's just so much out there. And it's really about, like, as you said, encouraging others to be intentional with this information. The reason why I do all my events is definitely, to help empower humanity. But when it comes to ancient civilizations, I want to give reverence to the journey that we've been on. and that's what it is. Like, we've been on this
Yes.
epic journey together, migration routes everywhere, tribes merging with each other. Like, it just blows my mind that I'm here in California, and my history of all the continents I've been on, and this is where I end up, So it's
Yes.
just the most interesting story ever told, man, how we got here.
Exactly.
Yeah. Beautiful. Paul, thank you so much again, brother. I appreciate you. We'll be in touch soon.
Thanks, Neil. It's been a pleasure.
Take care, brother.
You too.